Welcome to Annapolis Mosaics. Our program spotlights people in our community who are involved in activities intended to promote good human relations. I am Michael Keller, the chair of the Annapolis Human Relations Commission and your host. The commission is a city board that seeks to promote equal opportunity and to eliminate discrimination. My guest today is Craig Sewell, the proprietor of A Cook's Cafe, and Craig will be talking with us about the local food movement. Craig, welcome to Annapolis Mosaics.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, tell our viewers what the local food movement is.
The local food movement is part of a larger movement that has many aspects to it. As a chef, I think local foods grown in your region taste better. I think they look better. It has the environmental aspects and it has heavy economic aspects as well. So I think you need to look at local foods in the entire context of a local economy and how that lives and how we all need to support that.
Mm-hmm. Why is it important?
I'm trying to take a few of those things that I just mentioned in order. The food in this country has changed substantially in the last 30, 40 years. Mm-hmm. From when we were children, mm-hmm. Where most food was grown nearby. Mm-hmm. Most food was obtained in grocery stores that you knew the people that operate them, you trusted them, you knew what was in your food. Throughout this last 30 to 40 years, that sort of intimacy with where your food comes from has been lost in an environment more of industrial agriculture and mega farms. Mm-hmm. Which has constrained the variety of foods that we eat and has also increased a lot of the additives and effects of things that we eat as well. So most people at this point have no idea where their food came from. Mm-hmm. When we get notifications of recalls of ground beef or poultry or eggs, we notice it comes in hundreds and thousands of pounds. Mm-hmm. Are being recalled. Mm-hmm. My experience with this is that you may remember some years ago that there was the great baby spinach scare. Mm-hmm. In America, where in 22 states, 6 people died and about 200 people got sick. And at that point, I served a baby spinach salad in my restaurant. Mm. And I take very seriously what I do. And I realized at that point, since the FDA had no idea what had caused this outbreak, that we had totally lost control of our food chain at that point. So I set about trying to find a source that I felt a little more comfortable with in providing my restaurant, my customers, with baby spinach. Mm-hmm. And talked to my commercial produce vendor, and she found me an alternative to the California lettuce or mm-hmm. spinach I was using. Mm-hmm. To a place in Quebec, mm-hmm. which at that point still didn't give me the warm fuzzies that I was looking for. Mm-hmm. So I found a place on the Eastern Shore that was willing to start growing baby spinach for the mm-hmm. restaurant. Mm-hmm. And that's how I started being able to mm-hmm. offer foods through the restaurant that I not only knew the people that grew it, I knew how they grew them, and I knew what, if anything, was added to them, and what the distribution chain was. And it made me feel, it raised my comfort level. It started with me with the spinach.
Okay.
Because there's an additional part of that story.
Okay, let's hear about it.
The spinach was being grown in Trapp on the Eastern Shore,
Okay.
small place. So one of my problems is solved. I have a local source of baby spinach, but I still have a problem. And the problem is that they're in Trapp and I'm in Annapolis, and we somehow have to get the product from them to me. That particular problem was solved because their neighbor, Terry, worked the graveyard shift at Amtrak in DC. Terry would put the baby spinach in a cooler and put it in the back seat of his car. I gave him a key to my restaurant. He'd let himself in the middle of the night, put the baby spinach in the walk-in. I'd leave a check, and there was that. So the distribution aspect was solved. That expanded to multiple farms, eggs, dairy, meats, so that what we have in fact started is a distribution system all of our own. Now on a larger scale, all over this country, starting in San Francisco with Alice Waters and Chez Panisse, there are people that are actively engaged in setting up these distribution systems for themselves. So it is an independent thing that is run by chefs, by farmers, by consumers now into the growth of farmers markets around the country.
Well, let's talk a little bit about farmers markets, because I think that when people think of the local food movement, that's the first thing that's going to come to their mind, because they're very visible. People see them. What benefits do they provide both to consumers as well as farmers?
With the growth of the factory farm in this country today, and the reliance of these mega agriculture farms on oil and comparatively cheap oil to keep them going as far as transportation, fertilizers, being able to manage their crops. It's built on a system that makes things from large factory farms less expensive than things that are produced from, by and large, local farms. And local farms that may have growing practices that approach and are at organic levels. The growth of farmers markets, I think, fulfills a longing that people have to have this connection between where their food comes from and knowing the people that grew it, and being able to supply them and their families with what they perceive to be, and I think are correct, in healthier, fresher food.
What's the picture like for the local food movement in Annapolis and Anne Arundel County? Give us a sort of a sense of what's going on with it right here in the county.
Farmers markets are growing. There seem to be new ones opening up. I don't think that at this point it is a huge percentage of the amount of food that's consumed in this area. There are more people as I that have begun trying to source some of their food into restaurants, catering, institutions. Probably one of the biggest things for local farms to be able to do would be to be able to sell to the larger institutions, to the school systems, to the healthcare giving systems, to be able to expand their delivery of foods in that way. There are a lot of areas in this country that these are that are growing quickly, and they're mostly abetted by, once again, distribution networks to be able to facilitate the transportation of the food from the farm to the provider.
Are all types of food available to be purchased locally?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
I don't think, at least at the present advancement of climate change and global warming, I think it will still be a number of years before we grow oranges in Maryland. And if you want to eat oranges, they're going to come from someplace else. As avocados, as olive oils, as things like that. However, meats, dairies, produce, if one is willing to start eating seasonally, eating what is growing now and what is becoming mature now, and not insisting on having asparagus in the fall, because asparagus is a spring crop here, but instead eating late summer squash and the things that are becoming available, it is possible to eat a very well-rounded, very full diet sourced locally.
Okay. Are supermarkets tapping into the local food market?
Well, supermarkets are tapping into the fact that buying local or local foods is a good selling point for produce. The definition of what is local sometimes gets a little hazy.
In what way?
In the state of Maryland, for instance, there was a bill passed 2 years ago to allow the Department of Agriculture to put a definition on people who sold foods and their use of the term local. So if you were selling local spinach, what were the hurdles that you had to go through to use that word? I have my definition of local, other people have theirs. The result of that commission was that as long as you identify where it came from, you can use the term local. So under that guideline, you could have local spinach sourced from California or Canada or China, as long as you identified it as being sourced from there.
Okay. We're going to take a break now, but when we return, we will talk a little bit more with Craig about this notion of what constitutes local. We're talking today with Craig Sewell, who is the proprietor of a Cook's Cafe in Annapolis. Craig, I had carrots as one of the vegetables that I ate for dinner last night, and I've read that the average carrot travels 1,800 miles to get to one's dinner plate. Which brings us back to the conversation about local. When you talk about the local food movement, it really isn't just a geographic concept, is it?
No, for me it is geographic in the following sense. First of all, what you may or may not know is that not all carrots are orange. There are purple carrots, and there are yellow carrots, and there are striped carrots. But people are most familiar with orange carrots. And as I like to say when I teach cooking classes, I think the American palate has been sufficiently dumbed down over the years so that you may be accustomed to eating orange crunchy things, but chances are people have not experience carrots fresh from the garden in quite a while, and when they do, it tastes like it was from grandma's house. But the reason you don't see a lot of those different varieties of carrots, quite simply, is that they don't live well in a truck. So the varieties of radish that are the round, hard, red-colored ones, or the carrots that are nice and orange and straight, are the ones that win. And being able to live in a truck from field to table for a matter of weeks, and live in a truck for thousands of miles, and will be able to maintain their integrity. Whereas purple carrots maybe last 4 or 5 days out of the ground. So you need to be more immediate with where they come from. The transportation of carrots in your particular case, the way that the distribution network is set up in this country today is that it makes sense to have mega growers who are single sourcing their crops, who are developing what are called monocultures in many areas around the country, so that thousands of carrots are produced, packaged, and then distributed thousands of miles of from where they're grown, and distributed then hundreds of miles from distribution centers to your table.
Well, I did not know about the different varieties and colors of carrots. I did know that bananas come in other colors than simply the yellow one, or the yellow skin banana with which we're familiar. I think in Costa Rica you can get, I think they sell them in some places, are red bananas, which have a sort of distinctive flavor. So you know, the fact that we eat yellow bananas is because people think of bananas as having to be yellow, and if it's not that color, people say, I'm not sure what this is.
Well, actually, the bananas that you get in the store actually come into that store green.
Oh yes, well, absolutely. That's
and
right.
then ripen as tomatoes come in and are picked underripe, and oranges are picked underripe and then colored. So people are kind of generally unfamiliar with the treatment of foods. We also sell foods from the farm to the restaurant in a raw form. So people can order chicken breast from me if they want. And what I caution them when they buy fresh, boneless, skinless chicken breasts from me is that if they don't use them, cook them within 2 to 3 days, that I urge them to freeze it, because they simply do not have the shelf life that people have become accustomed to with foods in the supermarket.
Right.
And they honestly don't want to know what the treatment is of these chicken breasts to maintain their color and supposed freshness and whatnot in the grocery store. So a lot of the foods that we consume contribute not only to environmental problems, but they also contribute to health problems as well, with a lot of the additives and sugars and whatnot. My definition of local is Chesapeake Bay watershed. Farmers that deal in the Chesapeake Bay watershed have runoff, have farming practices that affect our water systems here, so that is my definition.
Statistics from the U.S. Department of Agriculture show that the local food movement, as defined by direct sales from to consumers, from the growers and the like, is growing very, very dramatically in the United States. In the 10-year period between 1997 and 2007, which is the most recent years for which they have statistics, the increase in the local food movement in terms of these sales was almost 2 times, and it doubled during that period. What do you think accounts for that level of growth, which is pretty striking?
Well, I would want to know how they define local, and doubling from what to what. I mean, doubling from 0.01% to 0.02% is not a dramatic increase. I would say that it has not increased from 10% to 20%.
Okay.
So I want to see what the details are. Are more people becoming aware of knowing where their food comes from? I think that's unqualified yes. What we need to do now is be able to find more outlets where it's easier and more available for people to be able to buy things locally, because it stimulates, in a larger sense, Mike, it stimulates the local economy. When you deal with a local business here in Annapolis, a local independent business such as me, such as people on Main Street, 64 cents of every dollar that you spend with that business stays in this community. When you go to a chain store, 16 cents of that dollar stays in the community. And especially when economies are contracting and going through difficult times, being able to use your money wisely and invest it in the place that you live becomes very important. Food is just one part of that.
One of the boosts that the local food movement has gotten in the United States came in the form of a very widely read book. It's Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma, in which he identifies the food production system and in being in four parts. That's the industrial system, big organic, small organic, and hunter-gatherer. Could you talk about these in terms of environmental / ecological and economic sustainability?
Well, taking from your last example to the first, the hunter-gatherer examples that Michael Pollan used in his book had to do largely with gathering mushrooms and being able to forage and glean to be able to do that. Interesting concept, practically very difficult for most people to be able to do. Moving towards small organic type farms, mom and pop farming, family farms, which are still on the rapid decline in this country. They do things usually in those smaller farms where they humanely treat their animals. You know, they care for the things that they grow and raise. When you start moving into larger industrial type farming, and there are some very large organic farms right now as well. In fact, the spinach that I talked to you about earlier in this conversation that sickened people through many, many states was actually an organic farm too. So that they have their issues. By far and away, the largest component of food production in this country is through factory farming of agriculture. And that has to do with the monocultures. Most antibiotics that are used in this country are used by livestock. Most of the corn grown in this country goes for animal consumption and not human. The sort of caloric intake it takes to produce a pound of meat much exceeds what the caloric intake that the meat provides to the consumer. Not only that, the environment is suffering as a consequence. To me, it's also extremely important that the animals are humanely raised. I am an omnivore. I do eat meat, but it's important for me for that chicken to have been able to live as a chicken is supposed to have lived, and not in an extremely confined space under very disadvantageous.
As you've noted, Craig, most of the food that people eat today is not locally produced, most of it, but there's increased interest in it. What are good ways for people to get involved more in terms of eating responsibly?
I think a good introduction for people to begin doing that is through membership in community supported agriculture programs, CSAs. where you, at the beginning of a growing season, invest in a local farm. And then you come by every week for between 20 and 24 weeks and are repaid from your investment with things that are coming mature from the farm. That gives the farmer something he seldom gets, which is financial security at the beginning of a growing season. And it also gives you the opportunity to eat very, very fresh items and a variety of different items from the farm. But what I also feel, because we've sponsored CSAs now for 6 years through the cafe, is that it also challenges you to spend time in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
So it encourages people to cook. People need to get back to spending time in the kitchen, because when they don't, something is missed. Something is missed in the home, something is missed in the family. The sort of connection that people have in the kitchen is a very, very special one. And prepackaged, processed food is not going to give you that. But being able to source your food and take home things, Swiss chard this week, what are the recipes I'm going to that, and be able to do that with your family on a weekly basis, and you know it's fresh and you know it's good for you, are excellent introductions to local food.
If people would like to learn more about this subject, what's the best source of information for them?
Well, I think that your introduction to the omnivore's dilemma will outline the problems in our food supply very well. There are also movies, one of which is Food Inc., which does that as well, although it candidly is quite frightening. But it tends to wake people up from the sort of slumber that they've been induced into over the years, when you can walk through a grocery store and see all these healthy things for you to eat, and they say they're healthy but really are not. And I think dealing with those of us that are actively engaged in cooking and sourcing properly, taking cooking classes, getting back re-engaged in the kitchen, making sure our children are eating responsibly and eating good, productive things for them. Those are all good ways for people to start getting engaged, visiting their farmers markets.
Briefly, what would you say the biggest challenges going forward are for the local food movement?
Our challenges are ongoing. We have challenges every week, every season, to be able to, for the farmers to be able to maintain that family farm. For small independent businesses such as I am, to be able to continue to keep our doors open. We all have those challenges all the time. That's part of the business. Obviously, the more interest that we have, the more supporters that we have, the more people that are actively engaged and like what we're doing, the more secure that we're going to be. It is, it's a labor of love. I don't know anybody that I know that does this for the money. They do it because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you for viewing our program today, and please join us again on Annapolis Mosaics. If you would like to have more information about the Annapolis Human Relations Commission, jot down the information on your screen. You can reach us at 410-263-7998 or by email at hrcommission@annapolis.gov, or check out our page at the City of Annapolis website. Go to www.annapolis.gov and click on the Boards and Commissions icon, and then scroll down to the Human Relations Commission link. And always remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "We have flown the air like birds and swum the seas like fishes, but have yet to learn the simple act of walking the earth as brothers and sisters."